Shalom and welcome to Yeshiva B'nai Noach. I'm Tom Abrana. I'm very excited to start this series on the book Israel and Humanity by Rabbi Eliyahu Benamozegh. This is he's just an incredible writer. He has many, many, many wonderful things to say. So I hope you enjoy learning more about him, learning about his commentary, and essentially speaking in the late 1800s. He died in 1900, and presenting a view of the world that we need today so desperately. And that view is that there needs to be a unity between Judaism, between Jews and non-Jews, Judaism and Gentiles, Judaism and Noachites. And in his presentation, as you'll see, he has a lot to say about the things that we need to understand, again, from his point of view, that Christianity, the role that Christianity has played and continues to play in all of this. So we'll, without further ado, we'll begin to talk about Rabbi Eliyahu Benamozegh, Israel and Humanity. But before we get there, I want to talk about one other book. So the book I want to talk about is Chaim Potok, The Chosen. It's a classic Jewish book written in, first published anyway, 1967. The Chosen traces a friendship between two Jewish boys growing up in Brooklyn at the end of World War II. Reuven Malter, who's the narrator and one of the novel's two protagonists, is a modern Orthodox Jew. He's the son of David Malter, a dedicated scholar and humanitarian. Danny Saunders is the other protagonist, and he is a brilliant Hasidic student with a photographic memory and a passion for psychoanalysis. Now, Danny is the son of Reb Saunders, the pious and revered head of a great Hasidic dynasty, and there's going to be a conflict with what Danny wants to do and what his father wants him to do. The novel tells the story of the friendship that develops between the two boys, and it examines the tensions that arise as their cultures collide with each other and with modern America. So we have a more modern Orthodox being a little more liberal than the ultra-Orthodox or the Hasidic group. So there's that tension that we're going to see develop between the two of them. Potok brings that out so wonderfully. The backdrop is the other part of the story, and it's the end of World War II. We have the revelation of the horror of the concentration camps and how that impacted the Jewish community, and the formation of the State of Israel. And it is interesting because I didn't know this until I read the book, but that there was this huge conflict going on about the establishment of Israel between the Zionists and the ultra-Orthodox. And we'll talk about that here in just a minute. But it's this latter situation that causes Danny's father to forbid, finally, his friendship with Reuven. Now, Reuven's father is a staunch Zionist, and this clashes with the Hasidic and ultra-Orthodox belief that Israel should never be founded unless it is by the Messiah and has a completely religious government, and not by secular Zionists. But once the State of Israel is formed and miraculously survives, Reb Saunders relents and allows the boys to resume their friendship. As the years pass, Danny's father continues to remain silent with Danny. Danny reveals to Reuven that he will not take his father's place. Instead, he'll apply to graduate school, pursue a doctoral degree in clinical psychology, and his younger brother Levi will assume the tzaddikat. Danny applies to Harvard, Columbia, Berkeley. He's accepted into all three, but can't understand why his father doesn't speak to him about it, because the acceptance letters came by mail and were surely seen. So this is the situation, and where I want to go here. And again, I recommend this book highly. If you haven't read it, read it. It gives you all kinds of insight into not only the Hasidic community, into the other more liberal communities in Judaism, but also that time period in America, what was going on. But here's the point, the part that I want to get to, which is really at the end of the book. So on the first day of Passover, in Danny and Reuven's senior year of college, Reb Saunders invites Reuben to their home to talk with him and Nanny. This is kind of out of the blue. So this conversation is just powerful, powerful conversation. Danny, who has grown up in an Orthodox Hasidic Jewish home, and his father, a great and respected rabbi, as I mentioned before, has refused to speak to Danny directly since the time he was 4 years old. So the final conversation is just filled with tenderness and revelation, and it's so powerful. Reb Saunders speaks only to Reuben. Remember, both of the boys are sitting there. He discovers Reuben is about to enter a yeshiva to become a rabbi, and Reb Saunders says that Daniel is about to receive his shmicha to become an Orthodox rabbi. Reb Saunders observes that now these two friends will be going in different directions, which is the way of the world. Still, talking only to Reuben, he says, "A man is born into this world with only a tiny spark of goodness in him. That spark is God. It is the soul. The rest is ugliness and evil, a shell. The spark must be guarded like a treasure. It must be nurtured. It must be fanned into a flame. It must learn to seek out other sparks. It must dominate the shell." He goes on to say, "Reuben, the master of the universe, blessed me with a brilliant son. Reuben, when my son Daniel was 4 years old, I saw him reading a story from a book, and I was frightened. He didn't read the story. He swallowed it as one swallows food or water. There was no soul in my 4-year-old Daniel. It was a story in a Yiddish book about a poor Jew and his struggles to get to Eretz Israel before he died. Ah, how that man suffered. And my Daniel enjoyed the story. He enjoyed the last terrible page, because when he finished it, he realized for the first time what a memory he had. He looked at me proudly and told me back the entire story from memory. And I cried inside my heart. I went away and cried to the Master of the universe, 'What have you done to me? A mind like this I need for a son. A heart I need for a son. A soul I need for a son. Compassion I want for my son. Righteousness, mercy, strength to suffer and carry pain. That I want from a son, not a mind without a soul.'" Reb Saunders then recounts the story of his brother, who was like Daniel and left his faith to become a mathematician, but ended up dying in Auschwitz. He also told the story of his father, who would wake him in the middle of the night and tell stories of Jerusalem's destruction just to make him cry. He would take him to places where people were suffering. His father also didn't talk to him except when they studied. He taught him the importance of knowing pain to develop humility. This is the way of the tzaddik, the righteous person. Reb Saunders then said, "A tzaddik must know how to suffer for his people. He must cry in his heart. He must always cry. Even when he dances and sings, he must always cry for the suffering of his people." Unquote. Then Reb Saunders reveals that this is what he tried to do for his son, the same thing that his father did for him. But he knew the dangers, because now they were in America and not Europe. And the difference is that it would be unthinkable in Europe for a son to leave his family, but not so in America. So the danger is that he would drive his son away, but he believed the greater danger would be to become a soul without a heart. Finally, Reb Saunders says to Reuben, "You think I was cruel? Yes, I see from your eyes that you think I was cruel to my Daniel. Perhaps. But he has learned. Let my Daniel become a psychologist. What, I do not see his books? I do not see the letters from the university? I do not see his eyes? I do not hear his soul crying? Of course I know. I have known for a long time. Let my Daniel become a psychologist. I have no more fear now. All his life he will be a tzaddik. He will be a tzaddik for the world. The world needs a tzaddik." And then Reb Saunders speaks directly to his son, and the tears flow from my eyes as much as from the characters in the book. They did then and they do now, just thinking about it. This conversation, powerful conversation, stayed with me ever since I read it in the 70s or even before that. 69 maybe. Reb Saunders, in my mind, is the voice of God to Israel, the voice of a father to his son. I heard a teaching once from a Hasidic rabbi, Moshe Nu, who asked, what is the one question we'll all want to ask God when we see him? Most people, according to Rabbi Nu, will say, I would ask God why there was so much suffering in the world. But that is not really what we want to know. We want to know, where were you, God, when I went through so much pain and suffering? And at that moment, we'll realize that God was right there with us. This also brought me to tears then, it does now. This is the answer to the question of why Israel, it's one answer anyway, of why Israel has gone through so much. The problem is that Christianity and Islam have mistaken all that Israel has gone through as proof that God no longer cares for Israel and will now choose someone else for their son. Those who ignorantly say this have no idea what it means to be a father. A father will never, never abandon his children, even though sometimes he needs to let them learn through their pain, their suffering. We see suffering and death as an awful end to life, but the wonderful truth is that there really is no such thing as an end to life, as death. It's like waking up from a bad dream and we say to ourselves, thank God that was just a dream. And then we try and figure out what to learn from it, hopefully. That's the truth. We are living in a dream, and when we suffer and die, we simply wake up and then either learn from our dream, or we may dream the same thing over and over until we finally do learn. That's why it was so important for us not to eat from the tree of life until we were sufficiently grounded in compassion and mercy, because after we do, there will be no more dreams. We had to eat from the fruit of the tree of good, knowledge of good and evil. And as we go through the pain and the suffering, we become like Daniel, who now that he will enter the world will do so with all of the teachings of humility and righteousness thoroughly forming his foundation. This is the lesson from Potok's book, The Chosen, the lesson from the history, the lesson that we have to learn. And this is part of the lesson that Eliyahu Benamozegh is going to teach in his book. So let's take a look now at Israel and Humanity, Rabbi Eliyahu Benamozegh. And if anyone doubts that Israel is still God's firstborn child and therefore will become the priest of the family, this is kind of the point that Benamozegh makes. They've only to look at modern history to prove God's faithfulness and love for his son. Now, part of this history portrayed in Potok's book, also take a look in the newspapers and headlines today, the miracle of the nation of Israel. But we are still learning and growing, and there may yet be one more or more great pain and hardship events that we have to endure before we finally learn. So the point is that we will learn. That's just not even a question. The question is, how much pain and suffering do we have to go through before we learn? But we will learn, and that again is a point that Benamozegh makes. We will become who we were destined to be. By we now, I'm talking about Israel. And who is that? We were destined to be the priests and teachers for the rest of humanity, for the rest of our family. So being chosen is not, according to Benamozegh, about being special. It is and always has been about being trained for a specific task. For Israel, that task is and will be to teach the 10 who will grab our garments and beg us to learn more about God. This is the relationship between the Jew and the Noahide. If we ever want to see the Mashiach come in our lifetime, we, Israel, must begin now to be the teachers and priests for the world. This is what brings Mashiach. And that brings me to the writings of Rabbi Eliyahu Benamozegh. So let's begin at the end. Nice Jewish thing to do, with his conclusions. And then we'll share information about Benamozegh, and in future presentations we'll continue from the book Israel and Humanity. So the book was originally published after his death by Amy Pallier. Forgive me, I'm sure I'm pronouncing the name wrong. A student and disciple of Benamozegh, who was Pallier himself was a unique person and writer. He apparently wanted to convert to Judaism from Catholicism after studying under Rabbi Benamozegh, but after many discussions with his rabbi, he was convinced to remain a Noachide, not to convert. Still, his life was lived as an Orthodox Jew, but he was sought after as a speaker and teacher by both the Jewish and Christian communities, which really was proving the wisdom of Benamozegh. After Benamozegh's death, Pallier spent quite a while with the almost 1,900 pages. So the book that we're going through now started out as a 1,900-page manuscript. Pallier reduced that to what he thought was a readable form, amounting to 800 pages. And this remained its size until 1961, remained its size, until 1961, when another revision cut that number roughly in half. Now, both of these were still in the original French, but it was also translated into Hebrew about the same time, and then finally into English in 1995. In the conclusion, as Benamozegh is summing everything up, he says, "The revelation on Sinai, we are told, is unworthy of a God of sovereign goodness. Exclusive religious privileges given to a single people to the prejudice of all others are said to constitute the most flagrant of injustices. It is indeed intolerable that a wise, impartial creator should act like a capricious, unfeeling father who enriches his favorite child by depriving all the rest." Benamozegh then expresses his hope that he's proven this wrong and shown that the divine law and revelations are given to both Jews and Gentiles with a few exceptions. This is what we shall see as we continue. He explains that inasmuch as Judaism has set itself apart from the corruption of the surrounding world, it was not to shut that world out, but only to be strong enough to face that world and to teach and uplift them. Again, think of what Reb Saunders was trying to do for Danny. Even though it may have sometimes failed in that regard, that remains the clear mission of Judaism as defined by God. The way we can judge that mission, according to Benamozegh, is through the greatest of Israel, the prophets. Even if the others lost sight of that mission, these men never did. He mentions specifically Samuel, David, and Isaiah, and praises them for holding fast to this vision when the people lost their way. According to Benamozegh, it's this that made Israel distinct from others, whose local deities existed only for their communities, states, or empires. But Judaism saw its God as the God of all. They alone held to this unity of one God. Quote, "This firm belief of the Jew that his God was the only true God did not allow him to claim that other peoples had no part in his paternal solicitude." Benamozegh further explained, but for Judaism, unity is not only of God, it is also of the world and of the entire human race. The image of divinity on earth, the partner of the creative spirit, is not the Jew, it is man. Moreover, long before Abraham's divine call at the very beginnings of the world, the Bible shows us God is concerned with the destiny of the human race, which he had created. And when Noah arrives, the just man, as the Bible calls him, he's honored with special revelations. New laws are given to him, and God concludes a solemn covenant with him and all his descendants. And you find that in Genesis 9, 8 through 17. In the very story of Abraham, a certain remarkable, nearly enigmatic person makes a brief appearance. But what light he sheds! From the shadowy depths of the pagan world, from the heart of that corruption and error which already prevailed everywhere, here in the person of Melchizedek, an unmistakable trace in heathendom of an ancient and honorable institution, a worship, a monotheistic priesthood, superior even to that of the Hebrew patriarch, since Abraham receives the benediction of this priest of El Elyon, master of heaven and earth, the most universal God conceivable. That story in Genesis 14, 18 through 20. So not only has the Bible preserved the recollection of this memorable encounter, but when it relates the call of Abraham and the resulting election of Israel, it recognizes explicitly that these events have taken place only for the sake of the entire human race. And all the families of the earth shall bless themselves by you, Genesis 12:3, 28:14, unquote. According to Benamozegh, Mosaism, a term he uses for the Sinai covenant, not only presented Israel with a unique mission, but ratified the Noahide laws as belonging to all the world. The unique practice of Israel when faced with these two laws was not to convert all non-Jews to his law, but to reveal to the Noahide their unique purpose. Rabbi Eliyahu spoke of our unique position centuries later to not only see this expression in the original covenant, but also benefit from centuries of thought and commentaries about it, especially the foundational statement made by Moses to Pharaoh, quote, "Thus says the Lord, Israel is my firstborn son," unquote, Exodus 4:22. He explains, quote, "This title of firstborn, far from excluding the other children of the Heavenly Father, to the contrary, presupposes them. Mankind is conceived as a great family of which God is the supreme Father, and Israel, firstborn among the brother peoples, was, as in ancient Eastern society, the priest of this family, trustee and administrator of holy things, mediator between heaven and earth. He was vested with priestly functions in order to serve all." In the light of this teaching, we can understand that Judaism is really two doctrines in one. There are two laws, two codes of discipline, in a word, two forms of religion. The lay law summarized in the 7 precepts of the sons of Noah, and the Mosaic or priestly law, whose code is the Torah. The first was destined for the entire human race, the second for Israel alone. The one contains only the essential principles of religion and ethics, which are in accord with universal reason and conscience. The other, with its dogmas, rites, and priestly precepts, responds to the mystical needs of humanity. It is one eternal law apprehended from two perspectives. Such is the meaning of the election of Israel. His people were chosen to fill the distinguished office of teacher, preacher, priest to the nations, and the nations in their turn would value Israel for the high merits of its patriarchs, but also for its natural predisposition to welcome religious truth, its essentially monotheistic genius, and above all, that firm, tenacious, indomitable character which was required to resist the pagan world, to vanquish and convert it. It was this revelation that has led, according to Benamozegh, to centuries of conflict and pain from those who misunderstood the election of Israel. He says, quote, "It is simple fact that this small, obscure people, scorned and detested by the Gentiles, with neither the science of Greece, the power of Rome, nor even the prestige of extreme antiquity, since by contrast with the ancient peoples of the East, it can claim only a relatively recent origin, today sees its religion, scriptures, traditions, and holy places the objects of universal veneration. Even more astonishing, its very name is fought over by peoples of altogether a different race." Benamozegh explains Christianity bases its existence on the notion that it has now become Israel. Islam also lays claim to the patriarchs and stories of Israel as its own. If imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, shouldn't we see the great rewards of this obsession? Instead, we have the record of history as one empire after another trying to wipe out the memory of God's firstborn to assume his position. So far they failed, and they will always fail, because God has never revoked his promise to his child. According to the rabbi, quote, "Shall we say that this circumstance, which seems to be one of the foremost triumphs of Hebraic ideas, is due to Jesus or Muhammad? Such a conclusion would be justified neither by historic truth nor by the principles of social evolution. Jesus certainly had no notion of setting himself up as founder of a religious movement to be created in his name, nor does the prophet or his teaching have greater claim to our attention in this matter. however considerable we reckon his role, like that of Jesus, to have been. So what we see is that behind Christianity and Islam, with their grandeurs as well as their blemishes, behind Jesus and Muhammad, we find Judaism with its sacred law, its blueprint for mankind. It hopes for renewal and universal brotherhood. How different the world would have been, Benamozegh says, if instead of attaching itself almost exclusively to the problematical personage of Jesus, erecting thus a new mythology on the ruins of the old ones, Christianity had seized instead and adapted the truths of Hebraism, which the Nazarene, a good Jew who did not dream of founding a rival church, undoubtedly wished to propagate. If instead of rupturing the natural ties which ought to unite it with Israel, it had worked together with Israel to create a great human family whose various peoples are equally dear to the Father in heaven, how much blood would have been spared? How many painful pages could be torn from the book of history? Unquote. Benamozegh holds out hope for the future, saying, quote, besides, no attentive observer can fail to notice that the evolution of those religions which have sprung from Hebraism is taking place at present in a Jewish spirit and fully justifies the age-old attitude of Israel with regard to the ancient Christian dogmas. It has reached the point where some have advocated a coming together of faiths, a growing sentiment which always has a place for the people of the Bible. This is a meaningful and encouraging sign. Thus, Israel and humanity are not at all mutually exclusive terms. The ideas of universal law and national privilege, of justice and predestination, of divine providence concerned with all men equally in the election of a single people, these ideas are by no means in irreducible opposition, like water and fire. There's no real antagonism between the special Jewish vocation and the unity of mankind, between the Jewish homeland and the brotherhood of nations, the priestly calling of the Jews and universal religion, the law from Sinai and the revelation common to all men. They all meet grandly in a higher synthesis, unquote. Benamozegh now sums up his review with a word of encouragement. Quote, have courage then, people of God. Hold firmly to your faith in the truth which has been entrusted to you. Surrounded by passion and error, you have always found in your pure ideals reasons to fight on and incentives to keep hoping. You have triumphed peaceably over attacks, traps, persecutions. Continue to refute fallacy with the teaching of your simple and luminous law. If the learned men of today persist in condemning you, you must make your appeal to the wise men of tomorrow. The past has shown you right. The future, too, will justify your immortal hopes and the predictions of your prophets, unquote. So again, all of that was from the conclusion that Benamozegh wrote for his book. So who was this rabbi who so ardently sought the unity of mankind? Eliyahu Benamozegh wrote in the style of a Kabbalist, but with generally broader strokes. He saw the mystical throughout the Mosaic texts as giving credibility to the ancient source in Kabbalah. His 19th century writings echoed the works of medieval Kabbalists, both Jewish and Christian. Amy Pallier, student and disciple of Benamozegh, who wrote the initial preface to this work that he, Pallier, painstakingly compiled and edited in 1914, more than a decade after Benamozegh's death, had this to say, quote, Elijah Benamozegh was born in 1823 in Leghorn. His family had come to Italy from Fez, and it has been suggested with some reason that these Moroccan roots may have provided significant nourishment to the intellectual development of a man who would eventually be called the Plato of Italian Judaism. It is certain that despite his exceptionally thorough assimilation of European culture, both his work and his cast of mind always retained an Oriental stamp. Pallier speaks of the early passing of Benamozegh's father and his raising by a staunchly Torah-observant mother who he gave honor to all his life. It is from her influence that, although he was guided to a business career, he instead, as a youth, pursued religious and academic studies. His mother's brother, Rabbi Yehuda Koryat, provided his initial training, but Benamozegh's keen mind enabled him to branch out into all facets of human knowledge. He was asked to preface his mentor's writing at the age of 16, proving his early talent, and pursued his rabbinic career for the next 50 years. Benamozegh became a prolific author, still according to Pollier, quote, "Yet it would be wrong to see in Elijah Benamozegh only a scholar. He was also in every sense a man of God. Far from wishing to hoard selfishly the constantly accumulating fruits of his understanding, he burned with a passion to share them with others, and saw in them only a means of fulfilling more worthily the obligations of his calling, which he pursued so scrupulously." Unquote. Although to his harm, according to Pollier, he was labeled as a Kabbalist, he never allowed this mystical world to overwhelm and remove him from the practical, physical world he was a part of. In the spirit of another great Kabbalist, the Vilna Gaon, who lived over a century before him, Benamozegh believed of Kabbalah, quote, that it is the distillation of all departments of knowledge, the sound, the light, the vibration of that divine essence within each of them, unquote. Again, according to Pollier, quote, this position which Benamozegh maintained all his life and which he continually justified in his writings gave him a unique force. Thanks to the mental discipline which he learned from the masters of Kabbalah, he found seeds for his own thought everywhere he looked. Far from fleeing from objection, he sought it out with obvious relish. He analyzed it, inspected every side of it in order to enjoy the profound satisfaction of exposing its defects, and even managed to discover in its arguments in support of orthodoxy. Neither materialism, pantheism, nor atheism itself could frighten him. He had no fear of dealing with them, and he moved along them with self-assurance and ease, taking careful account of error and truth. For him to deny a certain conception of divinity is not to deny God, nor is divine oneness subverted when God's attributes are perceived in different ways. And he was even so audacious as to show that Kabbalah can establish an inner harmony among the diverse philosophies which conceive of God each in its own manner, and even between polytheism and absolute monotheism. According to Pollier, everything came together in Benamozegh's training and temperament to drive him to his desire to see the reconciliation of Judaism and Christianity. Pollier expressed for Benamozegh his ultimate wish, quote, so keen in particular were his sympathies for the Christian religion that he went so far as to say and repeat that if Christianity should consent to reform itself according to the Hebraic idea, it would always be the true religion of the Gentile peoples, unquote. But by Christianity, Pollier explained that rather than the common understanding of the name, in its Hebrew context, the name was better expressed as Messianism. The true role of this movement was to bring the Gentiles to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and thereby usher in the Messianic age. For then would be fulfilled what Isaiah prophesied, when the world will be filled with devotion to God as waters cover the sea. Isaiah 11:9. So here are the facts of his life to sum up from Wikipedia. Elijah Benamozegh was born in 1823, died in 1900. He was an Italian Sephardic Orthodox rabbi, renowned Jewish Kabbalist, highly respected in his day as one of Italy's most eminent Jewish scholars. He served for half a century as rabbi of the important Jewish community of Livorno, where the Piazza Benamozegh now commemorates his name and distinction. His major work is Israel and Humanity, which was translated into English by Dr. Mordecai Luria in 1995. He was born in Livorno. His father, Abraham, mother, Clara, were natives of Fez, Morocco. Abraham died when Elijah was only 4 years old. He entered school early, where besides instruction in the elementary sciences, he received training in Hebrew, English, and French, excelling in the latter. Benamozegh was fluent in various languages and devoted himself later to the study of philosophy and theology, which he endeavored to reconcile with each other. At the age of 25, he entered a commercial career, spending all his leisure time in study, but his natural tendency toward science and an active religious life soon caused him to abandon the pursuit of wealth. He then began to publish scientific and apologetic works in which he revealed a great attachment to the Jewish religion, exhibiting at the same time a broad and liberal mind. His solicitude for Jewish traditions caused him to support Kabbalah. Later, Benamozegh was appointed rabbi and professor of theology at the rabbinical school of his native town, And his other occupations notwithstanding, he continued to write and defend Jewish traditions until his death in Livorno. Benamozegh's works are noted for his free and uninhibited use of various non-Jewish religious sources, especially the New Testament and ancient pagan mythology. He respected Jesus as a wise rabbi and a righteous Jew, but criticized the religious innovations of Paul and the invention of Christianity as a separate religion, which provoked the split of early Christianity from Judaism. Benamozegh's universalist views were recently promoted by Aidan Steinsaltz, who made a somewhat similar attempt to unify all major world religions and philosophies. Benamozegh believed that the authentic mystical core of the Jewish tradition, which he called Hebraism, as opposed to more isolationist exoteric Judaism, is profoundly universal and capable of uniting all world religions and nations into one brotherly cosmopolitan network. While Benamozegh believed in the unique spiritual mission of the Jews, his idea of Jewish chosenness was far from narrow particularism. According to his worldview, the Jews are chosen to serve the humanity as a priestly people, by proving a common mystical ground that transcends the boundaries of the nations and religious traditions. He also emphasized the impact of other cultures on Judaism, starting from the ancient Egyptian paganism, as well as the great role of the proselytes in the Jewish history. Unlike some exclusivist Kabbalists, Benamozegh believed that Kabbalah is a universal theology that unites all human beings and views them as equals. So that's a look at the preface for the book Israel and Humanity. In the next presentation, we'll hear from Benamozegh from his introduction to the book Israel and Humanity. I hope you have been and will continue to enjoy the series on this remarkable rabbi from Italy, Eliyahu Benamozegh, and we'll be back with the next part fairly soon, so be looking for that. Meanwhile, thanks for sharing your time. This is Tom Averna at Yeshiva B'nai Noach. Shalom.